I suppose my first question is a very simple one, which is, what's your thoughts on today's judgment? I mean, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It would be very nice if the public purse received that money. I think the prospects of the public purse receiving that money are pretty low. So lawyers like to talk about the corporate veil. That's a characteristically pompous lawyer's way of saying that limited companies are called limited companies because their liabilities are limited. It's very, very difficult to trace through monies that a company has paid, in this case by way of dividend, to Doug Barrowman and recover it from Doug because that pierces the corporate veil. The hurdle to do that legally is very, very high, and I rather doubt that government is going to get much or any of that 122 million.
And this is interesting because there was a possibility, I think, earlier on in this case that they could have done, but decided to push for the rather larger sum of money. Why do you think that was? Is this more about a symbolic victory, about sending a message, rather than the actual money involved?
Well, I mean, Labour came to office on the back of some very strong promises to go after those who had benefited from, and indeed those who had delivered the VIP lane. And what we've seen since Labour took office is much more modest. As I understand it, and I had a very good source at the time, Labour was talked out of a proper COVID corruption inquiry by the Cabinet Office. Cabinet Office, of course, had administered the VIP lane, so you can well understand its motivation. And what they ended up with was a temporary, part-time, semi-retired civil servant, a very nice guy, but with nothing like the sort of resource that you would need if you really wanted to go after the VIP lane. I mean, the other thing that's really, really important to note here is that if you're a business and government is offering to give out, in essence, free money, it's kind of logical, right, to join the queue. And we shouldn't pretend that if we were running businesses, we would do anything different. The wrongdoing here, the real wrongdoing here, is by the people who gave out the free money to their politically connected friends.
Well, I mean, the argument, I think, we heard this during the kind of when the Conservative government were in power, is that it was in the midst of a pandemic, it was the most unusual of times, and their main effort was on trying to have enough PPE to save people's lives. And in the end, if someone was willing to do that or said they could, then the government effort was to operate on that basis. And that actually it should be the moral duty of someone in the midst of a crisis for a country to do the right thing rather than something that might come terribly easy. Let's not focus on the politics of it, we can, though. Just in terms of what the obstacles are here, though. I mean, the government are still trying to recover more money. I think it's over £1 billion in total. They've talked about 1.4 billion. And they have made some progress. We should note that, haven't they, in recovering some money?
So there were a couple of announcements, I think, at party conference for various different sums. One, I think, was for 400 million, another was for 1 billion. I haven't seen what those numbers are made up of. I suspect very, very little of it is in relation to PPE.
But the government are making strides. What are the legal obstacles beyond, obviously, public limited companies? What are the legal obstacles that are preventing... You know, is this also quite difficult to prove in many cases?
No, I don't think it's especially difficult to prove, but there are a number of legal hurdles. Limited liability, we've already talked about, is one of them. I think that some of the particularly problematic contracts were settled. Disputes in relation to them were settled by the last government, and if that's true, then it becomes very difficult for a new government with different political priorities to reopen those settlements. Very often, because we bought so much PPE, very often we never inspected it before we incinerated it. So we don't know whether what they delivered was compliant or not. I mean, I have to gently push back. I don't think the points that I'm making are political points. I do think that people are entitled to expect that a government in a moment of crisis will buy PPE from the right people rather than from their friends. And if they had bought PPE from the right people, then we wouldn't have this enormous surplusage of unusable PPE like in the Mone case.
But I mean, obviously, again, the government at the time, and they made this case, is that the whole world wanted PPE. There was a massive demand for it. This wasn't just something confined to the UK. And the UK government were having to operate in an environment in which trying to procure that was going to be increasingly difficult. I think we all know that. But there are arguments around whether the due diligence in place was enough. And that's I suppose my next question is, we are where we are. They are trying to recover, of course, some of this money. What do you think needs to change so this doesn't happen again, frankly?
So I would very much like to see more resource for this unit. It's a very, very small unit. And I also think, and I'm sorry to labour a point that I know you don't really want me to put.
No. I'm very willing for you to put it. I'm just trying to give the response of what maybe the people who aren't here to defend themselves would say in response.
So the really important point here is that if politicians are, if under the supervision of politicians, civil servants are giving contracts to those who are politically connected, and there are no consequences for the politicians or the civil servants, then there is very little disincentive for future administrations to do exactly the same. So the answer to your question, how do we stop this again, is we attach consequences to people giving contracts. And every single thing you said about the Conservative Party's explanation for the difficulties in buying PPE, I agree with. I don't disagree with a single word. But you still have to answer the question, why was it these people with political connections?
So to go full circle then, back to Michelle Mone, she has suffered consequences. Not least of all in terms of reputational damage. The Chancellor of the Exchequer today was suggesting that she should be removed or indeed hand back the fact that she's a member of the House of Lords. So I come back to my question is, maybe this was much more of a symbolic victory about sending that message today.
I think that's right. If I'm right in my speculation that although government is making a lot of noise about chasing this money, its prospect actually of recovering any of it is very, very modest, then you're in a world in which Michelle Mone has been castigated in the national press for a number of years, but is tens and tens of millions of pounds richer. She might well think that's a trade-off worth making. And of course, she is only one of the hundreds of people who won PPE contracts, and there have been very little consequences for anyone else.
Indeed, and we're not getting necessarily the coverage that she and some others are.
No.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, as you heard, Jolyon was making some claims. We put those to the Cabinet Office tonight and the extent of its inquiry into COVID contracts. This is what they've said, that the COVID inquiry was launched by the previous administration and is a full statutory inquiry.